name is Mike Tedesco. I was drafted in 1966. I served in Vietnam in 1967 to 1968. When I was drafted, well, before I was drafted, I went to register for the draft when I was 18. When I filled out the papers, I put down that I had severe flat feet and migraine headaches. They asked me, do you have a note from your doctor? I said, I don't have a note from my doctor because it runs in the family. You cannot get a migraine headache unless it runs in the family. It's a neurological disorder, and it is a physical headache, usually preceded by an aura. And that's why I didn't think they would draft me, because I actually go blind for about a half hour before the headache sets in, which follows by 3 to 4 hours of vomiting and severe pain. Over the years, since I'm 5, I've been getting these migraines. When I met my wife, she had just turned 16. I was 18. I met her in July. Her birthday's the 24th. Now she's 16 years old. The second week I went out with her, I asked her to marry me. She said yes. When? I said when I get out of the Army, because I fully realized I was going to be drafted since other friends of mine of my age group were getting drafted. I didn't think too much of it because I had 3 uncles in World War II, 2 of which were migraine sufferers. So I figured, well, I would be drafted. What I would do, I have no idea. So I went down to register for the draft, and after I spoke to a couple of doctors, they gave me the paper, they wrote on it, they said, go downstairs. As soon as I stepped on the step to go downstairs, I heard, hey, you, where are you going? I turned around and looked, and there was a tall guy, thin guy in a long white coat with a crew cut. I recognized him because I seen him in the men's room drinking out of a paper bag that was still in his pocket. He said, let me see your papers. He looked at my papers, and he said, take your shoes and socks off. We're standing in the hall. I take my shoes and socks off. He takes a look. He goes, well, that don't look that bad. I said, okay. He said, what's this migraine headache stuff? I said, yeah, I've been getting them all my life. And he says, yeah, we have good doctors here. He said, here you go to that room over there. So I figured, oh, 1 minute I was 4F, and next minute I was 1A. Still didn't faze me because I realized I would get drafted, and whatever they asked me to do, you do. So when I went through basic training, first let me explain, the migraine headache is usually after the stress lets up, not during the stress, not usually, and maybe not for all people. So anyway, I would get these at nighttime when I would come back from the rifle range or training of any kind. I would suffer through the night. I would take a pillow with me and lay on the latrine floor, throwing up all night long. And the next morning, naturally, we can't go to training because we have like a bad hangover. So I would go on sick call, and when they send you over to the doctor, and he says, what was your problem? I said, I had a migraine last night, and his answer was, what do you want me to do about it? I said, I don't know, but I don't think I can go back to the rifle range this morning. Okay, so he figures I'm just trying to get off of work. So he writes on the paper, no duty. So my head is still kind of pounding, but after the main headache is over, okay. So I went back to the unit, like he said. I gave it to the first sergeant, and he says, oh, yeah, we get a lot of these. And he threw it in the garbage, and he said, Lieutenant, there was a second lieutenant there. He says, do you know where his group is at the rifle range? Oh, yeah. Well, do you want to run him out there? So I had to run out, I don't know how many miles it is in Fort Dix to the rifle range. It's a lot. So the next time this happened, and I got the same note, I went to the PX. And that was it. And I did that through basic training. When I went to AIT with my feet, I was a wireman, 36K20. I had to climb poles, learn radios, switchboards, teletype machines, and so on. Also had to get a driver's license. So I did very well with everything, and I enjoyed driving the truck because I drove a truck before that. We had a family business, and we had a frozen food business, and I drove the truck. So anyway, I love to drive, but I didn't go to get my license because I figured if I get my driver's license, they send me to Vietnam, and then what do you do when you say, you want to stop the whole thing? I'm having a migraine. So I didn't go for the test, and I figured, well, that's okay, because as soon as they have an investigation, why didn't you go for your test? I will then have to explain. And since it was on my reports that I had migraines, I figured, well, at least I wouldn't have to drive a vehicle or probably send me to Vietnam. Not that I really cared one way or another. Anyhow, they sent me to Vietnam anyway. So when I get to Vietnam, and I landed in Long Binh, and from there, I reported in. They gave me papers for Nha Trang. And I asked, where was Nha Trang? Oh, that's up north. Going up north is not good. So I got to Nha Trang. Beautiful place. The guys were playing softball. So I reported in the morning. They gave me papers for Da Nang. I said, where's Da Nang? Oh, that's up north. I said, gee, why can't I stay here? No, you got to go to Da Nang. I went to Da Nang, and sure enough, I walked in there, gave the guy my papers. He says, here you go, you're going to Dang Ha. I said, that's up north, right? Oh, yeah, that's up north. I figured that's much. So when I went to the airport there to get a lift there, the guy says to me, oh, I didn't see this before. Let me look on the map. He goes, here you go, right here. I said, no, I took a week of map reading, and that's North Vietnam, and I don't think we're there yet. So he asked somebody else, and he said, oh, that's Dang Hoi, sister city. You're going to this one that's on the DMZ. Okay, I get there, and I landed there. They had wounded going on the plane that I got off of, and there was a little TA-312 telephone there. It said, new people call in. And there was two guys with me. They said they didn't know how to use the phone, but that was my MOS, so I used the phone. It was just 3 for 1st to the 40th. They came, picked us up. Now I'm looking around, and now I don't see anybody playing baseball. I don't see any PXs or any movies anywhere. And I figured, yep, that's where I am. So when I got to the unit, I asked the guys, I said, hey, look, we're right on the DMZ here. How are things here? Are they bad? Are they, how bad? I've seen wounded. No. It's pretty good here. We haven't had any real problems. Okay. So that afternoon, when I went to get lunch, went to the mess hall, I ran into the sergeant, and he says to me, kid, you're the new guy. Can you drive a truck? I said, yeah, but I don't have a license. Oh, did I ask you if you had a license? No. Okay. So now I'm driving a truck. Oh, and the first sergeant asked the other sergeant, he says, he's a very good driver. Now, the guy who was driving the truck before didn't want to drive the truck. It wasn't his MOS anyway. He was from the surveying part of headquarters. So I got his truck, and I was driving for that. Consequently, whatever they needed somebody to drive anything, they would call me, including go to the airport or whatever needed to be done. Or airport, it was like an airstrip. So I was driving the truck, and I was just praying that, you know what, I hope I don't have a migraine. Now, I'm a bit of an artist. I had a program I could draw a migraine. So I have it here on my iPad, and I will show you that. Let's see. I drew a migraine, and I sent it to my brother, who also gets migraines, and he said when he's seen it, he got sick to his stomach. Now, I don't know how this is going to take. And also, I want you to remember, this aura lasts 1/2 hour. 15 minutes to have a full aura, and 15 minutes to goes back to normal. So this is the aura. I don't know if you can get that. Yep. Let's see.
That's your family.
Yes, that's a picture of my family. This is what happens to my eyes. I don't know, is it running?
Oh, yeah.
Now that takes a 1/2 hour to complete. Then it goes back to normal. So that's what an aura looks like. That's why whenever I would get the onset of a migraine at work, I would just get a cold rag, put it on my head with some ice, and leave, because in a few minutes, I have no vision at all. So I need to go home right away. Let me explain a migraine, because a lot of people get headaches, and they have a terrible headache. It must be a migraine, because migraines are the worst headaches there are. For instance, one day, my friend of my wife's was over the house, and she said, "Oh, I heard you had a migraine yesterday." "Oh, yes, I did." "Oh, I get them." "Oh, really? You get migraines?" "Oh, yes, I have one now." And I just looked at my wife. She looked at me. People think they have migraines. They have no idea what it is. Physical headache. It's a vascular headache. Here's why you have an aura. Now, I know this is lengthy, so you can cut it out if you want,
No,
but
this is fantastic.
here's how it goes. When you have an aura, the arteries in your body constrict. The smallest ones in your body are behind your eye. So they start to constrict, causing this aura. When you get the aura, you know it's coming. You can't see anymore. The problem is it comes back, like it's in that video. It gets normal again. The problem is the pain starts when it continues to dilate. It's like a heart attack in the brain. It affects one side or the other. The word migraine is Latin for half. It's bilateral. So now you have the pain starting. The pain is either over here or it's over here. It is not up here. It is not back there. All these people that have suffering from migraines, they don't get them. It's a biological kind of thing. It runs in the family. My grandmother got them. My uncles got them. My mother got them. My two sisters got them. Now, my sisters, who have natural childbirth, have told me that the migraine is worse than that. So if you can imagine how bad that is. So that's what I had. Now, when I was in Vietnam and I was on guard duty and I had a migraine, I would call the CP. They'd send somebody up, and I would stay there. And they'd say, "Come on, Tedesco, go back to your tent. I can't see right now. And it's nighttime." So they'd say, "Yeah, but you're throwing up over here. Can you go over there and throw up?" Anyway, this went on through the year that I was there. One day, the sergeant comes into my tent, and he says, "Tedesco, I heard you had a migraine." I said, "Yeah. Doctor's in the next tent. You got to come and see him." I says, "He can't help me at all. I'd rather just stay here. I'm fine. I'll be okay tomorrow. You got to see him." So I went to the tent, seen the doctor. He asked me some questions. He looked in this eye, looked in that eye, and he turned to the sergeant and said, "You got to go to the hospital ship." And I said, "Not going to a hospital ship." He said, "Yep." So he takes us over to I think it was called DeMed. That's like the MASH unit. So we go over there. The doctor says, "Tell your other doctor the ship left 2 weeks ago." I said, "Good. Now take me back to the unit, please." And the doctor said, "Well, he wrote it on the paper, so we're going to send you to Da Nang." I said, "I'm not going to Da Nang. This is ridiculous. And my head still hurts, so leave me alone." He said, "Tell you what, if we don't get mass casualties in the next 15 minutes, Sarge, take him back to the unit." 5 minutes later, I took a second lieutenant Marine officer off a helicopter. One foot was missing. He was trying to get off the helicopter by himself with his M16 as a crutch, and because everybody was taking the other wounded off. So I went over there, I grabbed him, I helped him off. And then 10 minutes after that, I'm on the plane being evacuated to Da Nang. 3 days I was in Da Nang, and I couldn't see the doctor because they were too busy. Finally get to see the doctor. And he says, "What's the matter with you?" I said, "Nothing." I said, "You got to sign that paper. They won't let me leave." He goes, "Well, don't get excited." I said, "Look, in case you haven't noticed, I haven't had a shower in many, many weeks or a change of clothes." So he goes, "Well, don't get excited. Let me read the paper." He reads the paper. He says, "You can't be in the Army. How'd you get in the Army?" I said, "I was just lucky, I guess." So he says, "Well, do you get the aura?" I said, "Yeah, I get the aura." He says, "Oh, well, you can't be in Vietnam." I said, "Yeah, I know. So he says, "Well, what do you do there?" I said, "Drive an ammunition truck." He said, "No, you can't drive." I said, "It's okay, I don't have a license." So he says, oh, wait a minute now. He says, I'm sending you home, so relax. I said, yeah, okay, fine. I'll relax. He said, well, how long are you here? I said, 10 months. He said, nope, you're here too long. He says, you got to go back to your unit. I said, well, sign the paper, and I'll go back to my unit.
And his reasoning for that is?
The red tape would take too long. I only had 2 months left. You might as well go back to your unit. Now that I look back at it, in my late 70s, I can see clearly this was a pretty foolish thing to do. You actually send someone who goes blind, who drives an ammunition truck, back to his unit where the place that you're sending him is constantly surrounded, under attack 24 hours a day. You send me back there. Well, I couldn't get back there right away either. It took about a week to get back there because the LSTs, the boats weren't going. I said, well, look, I can drive. I go in a convoy. You know, the roads are closed. So I slept on the table. I slept on the desk in Da Nang at the airstrip waiting to get out. I couldn't get out. It took a while. So meanwhile, I ran into 2 Marines that were also kind of like stationed and stuck there. So we got together, and we had to go someplace to eat. So we went to the officers' mess hall because we didn't have any insignias of any kind, and since we were dirty and scrubby, nobody wanted to mess with us anyway. So we went in, and they had fruit, they had ice cream, they had food. So we were pretty good, but we still needed to get out. We went over a place called Marble Mountain where they told us maybe you can get a helicopter out. They had the flying cranes there, the big helicopters that picked up everything. So I knocked on, I seen one of them starting to go, and I went over there and I banged on the door, and the guy comes down like a little elevator, like a chute. He comes down, he looks out, he goes, what do you want? I said, I need a ride. We're 3 of us here, we're going to the DMZ. He goes, DMZ, I'm not going. Close the door. So I went over to the where the security was, and I said, does that phone go to a switch? He said, I don't know what that is. I said, well, can I use the phone? Yeah, sure. So I get the phone, I asked for Dong Ha operator. He gave me Dong Ha operator. I knew the guy who was on it. I said, hey, this is Tedesco. I'm kind of stuck here. Give me first to the 40th. Thankful operator. That was my position when I was at work. So I got it, and I said, I need to speak to the captain. We're stuck here. So I finally got the captain. He had a phone in his hooch. Talked to him. I said, I can't get back. He said, well, he says, whatever you can. Don't worry about it. I said, okay. So a few days later, I managed to get a flight back. This was 2 weeks before the Tet Offensive. We landed back in Dong Ha, and I was so surprised. There were hundreds of gunships. First Cavalry was there, and I said, oh, this is great. We're saved. Now, a few minutes later, I hear these zoom, zoom, and a helicopter shooting right outside the perimeter. I said, oh, this is great. And then the helicopter went down. Another helicopter went over there, and it went down. And then I get a phone call, send out the Marines to pick up the pilots. And then a couple of weeks later, in these big helicopters that had these big baskets underneath were carrying several helicopters back, and we weren't saved. They all were destroyed. They were all shot down. And we had New Jersey come, didn't help much. We had the 175s come, which drew more fire. We had a main radar system that drew fire. And no matter what we did, we just drew more fire. When things would happen bad at nighttime, you could hear the jets finally coming up from Da Nang, everything would quiet down. All except one night when I seen 3 flares coming up from the other side of the river. And when they got to be the same height as our flares, I said, oh, okay, it don't look so bad now. We hear the jets come up, and then all of a sudden those flares were SAM missiles, and they went after the jets. After that, when we were getting hit at nighttime, the jets didn't come either. So no matter what we did, things were bad, and things just got worse. We got so much incoming that we had to dig holes to put our vehicles in so that one round wouldn't destroy so many vehicles. We thought that was good, and we dug trenches, and we dug bunkers way down, and then the enemy started putting time delay fuses on them. Now, we didn't have VC. We never used the name VC, but we didn't really know what VC was. We had NVA, the North Vietnamese regular army. That's who we were up against. That's who had us surrounded, and Quezon and Cantien and Jolin, A1, and all of this, the Rockpile, all surrounded. And we used to have to go out on ambush patrol. And we didn't go out on ambush patrol to ambush anybody. You went out there to be ambushed so you know where the enemy was, or you could pinpoint them. We had, I think they called it Puff the Magic Dragon there, would fly by nighttime taking pictures so that they could see what has moved, what has changed. We had the carpet bombing constantly, 24 hours a day. That helped a little, I guess. But we had the students over here in the United States yelling, "Stop the bombing." And I'm thinking, stop the bombing, we're sitting here. As they stop the bombing, we're gone. So it just kind of got worse. They would say, "Oh, Tedesco, you got ambush patrol again tonight." And I say, "Hey, Sarge, what about the surrounded part?" "Yeah, be careful." Okay. One of the guys, Mexican guy, he was a great guy. He volunteered for ambush patrol constantly. And I said, "Why do you're crazy to go out there. We're surrounded." "I know, but I can sleep." I said, "You can't sleep there." He says, "Mike, if somebody stumbles on us, we're all dead. So I sleep." He says, "I can't sleep here because we have so much incoming, there's no way to sleep here." The enemy would harass us. So every few hours you would get hit. Now you have to sleep with your clothes on. Didn't matter anyway because it rained. You couldn't get dry anyhow, and you had nowhere to wash your clothes. In the motor pool, we had to fill them back up because they filled with water. We almost didn't get all of our vehicles out before that happened. The bunkers collapsed. The situation just deteriorated and deteriorated. From when I first got there, a phone sitting there all by itself, to when I left, they drop you off in a trench and you wait for a plane to pick you up. The way it's supposed to work, they kick out the parachutes out the back. They slow up. The back of the C-130 is open. The Air Force guys are tethered to the plane. They're out in the back. They pull you on. Well, the first plane that came by kicked out the parachutes, and the income started to coming in. Rockets landing all over. The pilot waved us off. We ran back into the hole, and he took off. So I figured, oh, this is going to take a while. So then we had another one come in. This time, it was the pilot was waving us. "Hurry up, hurry up." So we ran. I managed to get on the plane. The plane took off. When the plane went like straight up, if it could, I looked down and I could see the airstrip. I could see the whole company. And there was a crater and a crater and a crater. That's where we had it. So this is why these things happened. We were stuck. We lived on a dartboard. The enemy could hit us anytime and did, anytime they wanted to. We had many issues. And with my flat feet, when I was in basic training, we went to AIT, and I had to climb telephone poles. And they put a gaff in the middle of your foot. That's what the harness you put on to climb the pole. I'm not afraid of heights. I climbed every tree in town when I was a kid. So I climbed up the pole, and then they tell you, okay, fasten in, okay, now circle right, circle left. No problem. Came down, next day I couldn't walk. My feet hurt so bad. Went on sick call, and the doctor said, "Kid, if I had a set of exercise for severe flat feet, this would be it." Well, that was fine, but I couldn't walk. So the next day, I had to go back to training. What I did was I put my gaffs on very slow. There were so many people. They were going up and down the pole, and then there were guys over there taking them off. So I migrated to over there and would take them off. And the sergeant would, "Did you go up the pole?" "Yes, Sarge," because we had several sergeants. I did that all week in preparation for the test, which then I took and then I passed, so I didn't have a problem. There was no, back in the 60s, there was no sense trying to tell them you had something wrong with you. You would just get harassed, beat up. It's not like the military you see today. A lot of the guys I was with said, a judge told me, you go to jail or you go in the military. And I'm with a bunch of convicts now. I don't drink now. I didn't drink then. I didn't smoke marijuana, not then and not now. It's just my migraines were so bad that the idea of getting drunk and throwing up, I ain't gonna buy it. I'm now 78. I still get migraines, although the last 6 months they gave me a new pill that has seemed to take care of them. And I get other medication that seems to help now, not before. My theory is my arteries are now so clogged up, they no longer have the ability to expand or contract. Yet I still get them, and I still get the aura, and every now and then I get a bad one. But that's pretty much the way it is. Well, I was getting them 3 times a month for the last 5 years. I had an accident a while ago, and 2 of the muscles on my leg were ripped off, and this leg is pretty much numb. And I have diabetes now, so I have neuropathy. But the migraines have almost stopped with this magnesium oxide they gave me. There was a doctor in the hospital in East Orange, I think it is, that prescribed that. And since I'm taking that every day, the migraines have almost disappeared. Didn't have that migraine medicine years ago when I was a kid. Maybe it wouldn't even work then, but seems to be good now.
Great. Magnesium oxide?
Yeah, magnesium oxide. It says right on it, for migraines, magnesium oxide. And I have Nortec that I take on the onset of a migraine. So we had really very little communication with the locals. And when I first got there, they were washing your clothes. And that seemed to be okay, except you never got your own clothes back, which was okay too, at least you didn't have to wash them. Once the monsoon came and the heavy firing came, they no longer came either. So now you don't wash your clothes. If you did, you couldn't dry them. I was talking to one of the guys. I said, you have mold growing on you? He said, oh, you don't have any tents in your hooch? Oh, I have some mold growing on me? Oh, yeah, look at that. My shoes under my bunk, you couldn't see them. They looked like bushes. The tent grew mold. Everything grew mold. I'm driving a truck now with no top on it, and the sergeant asked me, what's the matter with you? Are you crazy? You're driving around here without a poncho in the pouring rain. I say, Sarge, look at my truck. It has no top on it. I'm sitting in a puddle of water. It's raining like mad. I said, and with that plastic on me, I can't breathe. So I'm soaking wet anyway. I threw it away. Oh, okay. And that was what I continued. The trailers that I was driving were sliding in a ditch along the side of the road because they wouldn't stay behind the vehicle. It was all mud. Everything was mud. Everybody had mud to deal with. Yeah, well, most of the driving was inside the compound, except when we had to go to the river to get the water for the shower. And the last time I went to the river, to get to the river, I had to pull down and make a crazy turn. Every time I did it, I went real slow because I thought the trailer would roll down the hill. It was that steep. I would have to then back it down into the river. Last time I went there were 2, I guess they were Arvin, up on the cliff next to the truck. And those guys, they had uniforms. So I figured, well, if they're NVA, I'm dead already. So they must be Arvins, the South Vietnamese Army. So I'm down there. I'm kind of hiding behind the trailer as I'm setting up the pump to pump the water. And one guy is taking his clothes off, but I'm watching them. I don't know what they're doing. And then I see the other guy has a grenade. And I'm thinking, they're up there laughing. Wait till you see what we're going to do to this guy. So now I get my weapon, and I get it ready, and I put it between the truck and the trailer. I figured I could shoot him if I have to. They won't be able to hit me from where they are. And he's got the grenade, and I'm like, this is all wrong here. And I'm figuring any minute he's going to toss that grenade, because why else is he holding it? But he doesn't have it. Now he's only in his undershorts. So I'm kind of leery of this whole thing. But when I seen him pull the pin out of the grenade, my heart kind of took a jump, and I grabbed my rifle, and I put my finger on the trigger, and he threw the grenade the other way, but he kind of like just lobbed it. When he did that, I was like, I have no idea. That's a real grenade. I threw that in basic training. That is a very powerful piece of equipment there. It went in the water, and I have no idea what's going on. Big explosion. And all these fish came floating up to the top, and he dove in off the cliff, and he started throwing all the fish up on the shore. And then I relaxed. I figured, oh, he's fishing. He's fishing with a very expensive fishing rod. You know, so here's a government issue, and he's throwing it in there, and he's got all these fresh fish, and he's throwing them up. They start to come back alive again, but meanwhile, they're out of the water. He's got them. So after that, I says, you know, I don't want to go here anymore. So I went and got the other water, which they didn't like to let you do that because that was the treated water. That was only for your food, so they could make eggs with nice water that smelled like bleach and was kind of brown. So you had nice scrambled eggs in the morning that looked like dead pancakes, gray pancakes. I couldn't eat them. But I did eat the bread because the bread had like raisins in it, but they were all flies. But it was good protein, they told me. So I had to put a lot of jelly on the bread. So I went over about 180 pounds. I came back at about 130. Just the way it was. You know, when I had dysentery and I had got to the hospital, or the urgent care thing, and the doctor said, "Did you walk in here?" I said, "Yeah, your fever's 105. I said, "What does that mean?" It means you're going to die soon. So he said, "There's a shower there. Go in there and stay in the shower until your temperature comes down." So I went in the shower for 3 hours. Finally, the temperature came down. They gave me a bed in an air-conditioned tent. I didn't know where they got the air conditioner or the electricity to power it. So I was in there, and they checked my temperature every few minutes until finally the guy comes down. And he says, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'm good." He said, "Get up, you come with me." Took me to the operating room. He says, "We need your help." There were 6 guys in there in their undershorts, flak jackets, no T-shirts, and helmets, no gloves. And they were operating. And what they wanted me to do was lean on this sheet that was stuck in this guy, put some pressure on it. I'm looking at this guy. I know he's dead. But I guess they figured that maybe if they have time when they're finished with those that he can save, that they'll take care of him. So after about a half hour, I said, "I'm going to pass out soon." And they said, "Oh, okay, give us another minute." That wasn't the only one. I seen them take a guy who was alive on a stretcher, put him in the dead pile, his arms flapping, holding him the size of a dinner plate. When they got him over there, the guy checked him out again, and he sent them back. So now I see them coming across the runway with this guy, his arms flapping. He's still alive. The other guy who sent them over there looked up and said, like, "I know he's alive. He's going to be dead any minute. Put him over there and get him out of the way." That night, and the sun went down, it was a beautiful night. Calm. Vietnam is beautiful. 2 guys out there with leather aprons, smoking cigarettes, shooting the breeze as they hose down all of the stretchers with all of the blood. And I seen the tent where they cut all the clothes off the guys. There was a helmet there with one hole in it, and the hole was blown out, and there was a ring around the helmet. It was a ridge. And I'm looking at that, and I'm thinking, I picked the helmet up. The bullet must have gone in, spun around the helmet, and exited the way it came in because it was an anomaly in the helmet. And I thought, gee, that poor guy. Well, one of the young fellas that worked for me seen my bumper sticker that said Vietnam veteran. He was in college. This was at the time Full Metal Jacket came out. And he told his teacher that I was in Vietnam, and they asked me would I go and speak to them about it, which I did. I had slides then. I showed them the slides, showed them everything. Later on, when the kid came back to work the following week, I said, "Well, okay, so what did your friends seem to say?" "Well, they were very impressed that you were 19, the same age that they were." Because I turned 18 in September. In October, I was in the Army. So they were trying to relate how they would manage, since they are still being babied as children, and since in my day, you grew up really fast, which shows you, since my 16-year-old girlfriend said she'd marry me, which I think we're married over 55 years now. So yeah, make sure you have the right woman, and make sure all those reasons why you married her in the first place are still there. My wife is very good. She prayed for me the whole time I was there, that I would come home in one piece. And so did my mother. We come from a very religious family. And so my only problem was on the plane over coming back, I was thinking to myself, now how am I going to act now? Because every other word is a curse word. And when I get home, I have to be very careful the way I speak, which I have managed to do. I have not uttered any four-letter words, except love, since I'm home. I have 4 children and 7 grandchildren. And everybody, thank God, is doing well.
Praise God for that.
That's right.
So you went over with a spiritual foundation.
Absolutely.
Do you think that played a part in you being able to handle all that you had to endure?
Definitely. You know, I used to say to myself, look, you didn't put yourself here. You didn't volunteer. This isn't my fault. If I get killed here, I had nothing to do with it. It's God's will. That's the way it is. My mother was very religious. I was one of 10. And my wife to this day is in 2 church groups. And my kids all have a good religious foundation. I went to Catholic school. For me, it wasn't too good because I am very dyslexic. And so we had 50 kids in the class, and I sat in the back with dumb kids. And my father used to tell me, you better work hard all your life because you're stupid. And you're probably always going to be stupid, so work hard, which I did. And he used to say, you don't have to worry about a good education. We own a restaurant. So I worked there all my life, up until 1996. Well, we had this restaurant, and the restaurant wasn't doing all that well years going in because we had no parking lot because it's a city-type restaurant, and it held like 300 people. So you suffer a little bit between, all things considered. Plus, in West New York, New Jersey became predominantly Spanish, which is fine, except they didn't speak English. And even to this day, you can go into some stores in Union City and in Hudson County where you will find people that say, sorry, don't speak English. It's all Spanish now. And it was done because the people came from Cuba. After Castro kicked out the people, they came, and we got all the best of the Cuban people, all the educated people. There was a doctor my father had hired to wash dishes. And I used to try to learn how to speak Spanish, and he say, no, only speak English. I have to get my doctor's license. He was washing dishes. And they all came. We had one guy owned a sock factory, another guy a cab company. They all washed dishes until they could get their language straightened out, and they'd go to school at nighttime. Good people. But they did open the door for the third world country that didn't have time to learn how to speak English or the education to help them. And so that's where it is today, although today it's changed a lot as well. Okay, I thought it would be a good idea, since I found out there was a guy who did a local TV show that was all over the country. So I thought, well, look, let me hire this guy to do a TV show at the restaurant. We should certainly big enough for it. So I talked to his producer, and he said, fine, we'll do the TV show there. Good. So I hired another guy with the camera, and I hired all the people. And then his producer called me and said, sorry, he won't do the show. And I said, why not? He said, well, he don't work in front of a live audience. He didn't know. I said, well, what was he thinking? So I said, okay. Since I had already hired people, I told my brother, I said, look, Tony, we'll do the show ourselves. We'll call it the Mike and Tony Show. And he said, yeah, okay. So the night before the show, he says, I'm not doing it. I said, you're not doing what? He said, well, I'm doing a TV show. I said, and when were you going to tell me? You know I hired the people. You know it's tomorrow. Well, I can't talk in front of a live audience. I said, I don't understand why. Well, it's your business. It's your building. How could this not be a problem? So anyway, I said, all right, can you do this? He said, yeah. I said, all right. So I figured out a way to get around this for the first show. So a lot of the family was there for support. And when the show started, and I introduced myself in the show and everything, I had them, where's Tony? Where's Tony? So I said, you know what? Tony is in the back arguing with the wardrobe lady. He'll be out in a minute. And then I did a show. We used our customers who were very intoxicated, which was all the better. So we used them. We did a show. And then at the end, when I was saying goodnight, I had them again yell, where's Tony? But by this time, Tony is standing behind the curtain like this. So I opened the curtain. I said, oh, here's Tony. He's got a hat on, sunglasses, a cigar, and he's like this. And he goes like that. I said, well, that's it for tonight. Thanks for coming. And that was the beginning of the show. And after a long time, Tony did start to appear on the show. Because a lot of, I advertised in Backstreet magazine in New York. And I got a lot of professional people and semi-professional people. Because the show that I was on locally was in 3 states. So they were getting some, some publicity out of it. And we had a pretty good show. And every now and then I'd get a call from somebody up in New York State saying, your show stopped running. And when I called the company, they say, well, we have to beam your image across the Hudson several times. And every now and then one of the chains go down. And I said, all right, well, there's one down. And it was in Pennsylvania, New York State, and New Jersey, all of New Jersey. And the Associated Press came and did a story on us. And then my uncles called my mother and said, your kids are on TV. So it was kind of funny. And then I had my son John, who was in high school. He was doing the filming eventually because I didn't want to hire somebody all the time. And we had a guy who came in and helped us with it, with the editing. He did the editing. So the show went on for a good while. It's on YouTube. If you Google the Mike and Tony Show Tedesco, it'll come up along with the restaurant as well, Tedesco's Restaurant in West New York, New Jersey. We're still on there. My son John did websites at the time, so he put it on there. And I think my daughter put it on Facebook, and so it's still out there. I look a lot younger in those than I do now, but it's still there. I guess it'll be there forever, as will this. When Deer Hunter, the movie Deer Hunter came out, some guy said to me, you got to go see that movie. I said, yeah, a hunting movie, right? No. He said it's about suicide and Vietnam. I said, really? I was in Vietnam. I don't remember any of that. He said, you were in Vietnam? I said, yeah. I knew the guy for 15 years, and he didn't know I was in Vietnam. Because you didn't talk about it, because what's the point? You were considered baby killer, or you shouldn't have went. And when they stopped paying for the South Vietnamese to support the war, I was like, they're going to let this go down after all the men who died and suffered and bled? They're just going to let it go. Why not before? So it kind of gives you a sick feeling. But when the peanut president all but apologized to the guys who went to Canada to please come back, it's okay, I just thought, who's going to fight your next war? Would I send my children or grandchildren if they got drafted? I don't tell people that I'm in Vietnam. I don't wear Vietnam hats or shirts. The kids have bought me shirts and things, but I still don't feel comfortable. Some years back, before the Gulf War, we had gone to Gettysburg. And in Gettysburg, they said, anybody who was a veteran, stand up. And later my wife said, why didn't you stand up? I said, I don't feel right. I still don't feel right. Probably take some time. But I will say, now that we have a president who is not a politician, now that we have a vice president who is a soldier, and now that we have Pete Hegseth running the army, next time I bring my grandchildren there, I'll stand up. So you think about those things when you think about the peanut president telling the guys, look, we're sorry, we made a mistake, you come on back. No, that was bad. I almost threw up because I think about those guys. And I think about the guys where I seen ponchos with 4 and 5 dog tags, where I seen the helicopter, the breeze from the helicopter lift the sheet off this guy who looked like he was sleeping, but he was white, he was dead. But it looked like he was sound asleep. I don't know what killed him. And the other guy next, the stretcher next to him, there was legs, and there was nothing more than legs. As the tarp blew up, it was just a few ribs. So I thought about all of that when that happened. And knowing that the country, these career politicians, the politicians don't serve. They serve each other. They get rich, they got power. These career politicians, that's what it is. You know, that's all it is. Since the United States is the best country in the world, and it's also the largest business in the world, who better to run it than a businessman, President Trump? That's where we are today. And that's why I feel next time I'll stand up.